Hey everyone, thanks for being here. We're going to talk about authenticity in the age of AI. We've been talking about ZK and AI all day here, and it's been interesting, lots of good conversations, but it's time to get a bit more real and talk about what authenticity means and how we can keep things, more like as real as possible. We need synonyms for the word real at this point. But I would love to start with introductions for all our amazing panelists over here. Your work is widely recognized in ZK. Yovela, Fiamma, hit us with it. Give us your introduction.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so I'm co-founder of Fiamma. So what we're building is we're utilizing ZK technology on Bitcoin, so we can really enable Bitcoin to do a lot of judgment, and then enable the most trustless infrastructure on Bitcoin. So what we can do is people can now earn, very easily with native Bitcoin, and also can lend, borrow, do many different things with Bitcoin. And on the other hand is that if we can enable, Bitcoin to verify ZK proof, in some way, then you're actually unlocking, the security value of the most, decentralized and secure network. Then, for AI and different applications, then definitely we can also, for the first time, get access to Bitcoin network security as well.
Harry?
Hey, Harry Grieve, co-founder and CTO of Gensyn. We're a machine learning compute protocol, and we focus very kind of tightly over increasing the scale of models that can be trained. To do that, we focus on new communication strategies between decentralized compute nodes, but also folding as much of the kind of long tail of hardware into the training runs. And to do that, you encounter the trust problem. How do you know that your request has been faithfully executed? And in order to solve that, we go very hard on different verification strategies, making sure that the outputs from two different devices, even if they have heterogeneous architectures, are identical, so bitwise exact, reproducible machine learning. And also, as a consequence of all that, we think a lot about zero-knowledge machine learning, because that's one way that you can authenticate that something has been executed as requested on a device.
Very cool.
Hey everybody, I'm Eric, co-founder and CEO of Self.xyz. We are not as complex. We just help to verify people are real, currently using passports and NFC chips. And we do this both on-chain and off-chain. To help further this conversation, really think it's important for people to be recognized for our contributions, because AI is going to outdo all of us.
So let's begin with you. What does it actually mean to be authentic in terms of, the ZK space?
Yeah,
and how do we verify that?
Sure. So I actually think authentic just means that, you can prove something was created by a particular, it doesn't have to be a person, but in a certain way, and you can go back and verify that. I think for stuff that's created by people, which could be, for example, new agents, new bots, and things like that, I think it's important to trace it back. Not everybody will believe that that is something that we should be doing if you trace it very obviously publicly on chain, but through ZK, you can prove provenance or proof of how something came about, who created it, how did it change, and you can do that all nowadays without having to rely with publicly exposing all that information. So that's just my thinking.
Harry?
Very similar. For me, I think of it in kind of three stages. It's an input, a function, and an output. Usually you can see the output, but you don't really know what the input was or the function. And then you have different verification tools to validate the input, and the function were the things that you requested. And if you can trust both of those, usually it follows you can trust the output. So even if the output is something which you have access to, but you can't necessarily differentiate. So for example, the neural weights of a large machine learning model, you can't kind of look at a bunch of floating point values and be like, yeah, that's right. You need to kind of trust that somewhere further, back in the chain on the input or the function side, it was correctly executed. And, those 2 points, input and the function, are the things that we think about.
Yeah, I think authentic. I think reality, these are really important things, especially when it comes with, asset transfer, right? When everything deals with asset. So for instance, for Bitcoin, if we're trying to utilize it in some ways, so far you have to bridge it, to different ecosystems and then to engage and define different opportunities. But how can you make sure that those Bitcoin representation are actually real, right? They're actually representing the real native Bitcoin. You need to ensure that so that those representations are valuable. So now ZK really, comes into place here. It's just that we can whenever we are burning, the tokenized Bitcoin on Ethereum or other chain, for instance, we can generate ZK proof to prove that. And then if anything bad happened, like by the bridge operator or anyone, then Bitcoin can come in as the judge to slash the malicious operator and restore the justice. So this is all made possible because of ZK and how we actually can write ZK verifier in Bitcoin script and also optimize it.
What are some verification strategies that Fiamma uses? I know that ZK proofs play a very big role in it, but if you could walk us through the step-by-step process, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So I think that so for the technology that we're building is called BitVM. So basically what it does is that we allow Bitcoin to verify ZK proof optimistically. So it means that it's not like I'm asking Bitcoin to verify, all the time, because it's just so expensive, and difficult to do on Bitcoin. So the challenge will only happen when, when there's really something wrong, right? So we will need Bitcoin become the judge. And then how it works is that during the withdrawal process, then as mentioned briefly earlier, we will burn, for instance, a Fiamma BTC on Ethereum. And then we will generate ZK proof to prove that, and also prove that, okay, the block is also valid as well. And then we will aggregate this proof, and the bridge operator will verify the proof. And if they think that it's valid, they would help the user withdraw with their own money first. So the operator will send the user BTC from their wallet. And then after maybe around 3 days of challenge period, then if no one report the operator, then they can claim, the Bitcoin locked by other users. But if during the challenge period, someone says, oh, the result is actually different from what I have, then I can just initiate the challenge, and Bitcoin would definitely step in and rerun the verification. If there's any discrepancy, the operator will be slashed. So this is how basically how the ZK proof generation and also how the verification on Bitcoin are done during BitVM. And the final point I want to also explain is also how we can actually enable the smart contract-like capabilities on Bitcoin, right? That's because in Bitcoin, there's a more advanced address type called taproot. So you can actually, specify a lot of conditions using those input and output, so that actually there are only 2 conditions that this amount of Bitcoin could be unlocked. The first is that you acquire, both the user and the bridge committee's private key. So that's the first way. So basically, no one can move the Bitcoin. The second way is that when the operator is honest, no one challenge, then the specified operator can claim the BTC. So that's how we can, kind of emulate the smart contract capabilities on Bitcoin.
That's very cool. Thank you for giving us the whole detailed process around it. Harry, same question to you. You mentioned that there's inputs as a process, and then the only thing that's visible is the output. Does your verification process include ZK as well? What's the breakdown?
Yeah, we have a mixture of strategies for doing it. Similar to a panelist who was on here earlier, they mentioned, you want to have, there's not one to rule them all. I think we would agree with that. With the caveat that we think it can all be done programmatically. It doesn't require a human being to be in the loop, but certainly having multiple strategies is good. Really, it kind of cuts out 4 ways, I'd say. So you have the kind of more reputation-based strategies, which are, typically less Byzantine fault tolerant than some of the strategies I'm about to mention, but that's your kind of proof of reputation, kind of point scoring. They typically fail at large scale because the quorum of people who, vote needs to increase in a non-linear way with the size of the network. So that doesn't really work. The The second strategy would be the kind of more like optimistic style strategies where you most naively would do something like partial replication. So you just replicate part of a training run. There are ways you can optimize that by using like bisection games where you make Merkle tree units to the symbolic representation of the machine learning graph, and then you kind of play a pinpoint game where you narrow it down to some operation that the two parties disagree on. We've released research in that area. It's on our website, gensyn.ai/research, our Verdi paper. A third option is to use ZK, and ZK would kind of be in that kind of category, I'd say, of like there's some like secondary characteristic about the a proof or some output which you can attest to, which makes someone else believe that the input and the function have been are as requested. There's a fourth category though, which is similar to that but different. We're exploring this a little bit in our research team, but it's the idea of like kind of data radiation or watermarking, where you can inject some type of noise only known to the some like with some submitter of the job to a network, and then consequentially the kind of presence of some level of that noise or that watermark in the outputs is basically a proof that there was the function at least saw some of the input. That's like a weaker strategy, but it's one which is a lot less kind of expensive than a sort of zero knowledge approach. And when it comes to zero knowledge, a lot of our kind of work just now focuses around Ezekiel, particularly their matmul proofs, which we really like just from an efficiency perspective.
Thanks for sharing, Eric.
Yeah, cool. So for self, I don't know if we have strategies, but the way that the system works is when people register, we use the information in the NFC chip and some public information from every country that issues passports to verify that it's a real passport and the chain of issuance is valid. We register and nullify into a Merkle root, and that's how we can determine without revealing any of the information about the person whether or not that passport is valid and true. The second part is through disclosures. People can share some information. They can pick and choose what they share, and we create proofs based off of that, and then distribute that either on-chain through a smart contract or off-chain to like a regular API endpoint. And those three things, in addition to distributing these Merkle roots across whichever blockchains we want to support at that particular time, is how we work. And it allows us to move the proof wherever it needs to go, on-chain or off-chain.
Could I ask a question?
Of course.
How does it compare to sort of Onfido or some of the, I guess, KYC style SaaS providers that are in the sort of Web 2 world?
So that's a good question. So we don't consider ourselves KYC. And the reason for that is KYC requires holding data for 5 years or until it can be audited or requested. So we provide as a proof of that information, sort of encapsulated, that the company can store. So that's how it's different. Like we're not trying to replace KYC. We want people to use proof to verify that someone is real and go from there. Like deciding whether or not basically someone is on OFAC list or not, if they're in a sanctioned country. You can follow, I think in the near future, it may replace KYC, but that's not our implicit goal. We just want to help us realize, we're all sitting here, we're all real, right? Move on.
Maybe I'm just a bot,
Are you? I can't.
Maybe so how long does that process take of verifying?
No, I think this is important. So for all of us here, ZK proving has sped up considerably from hours to minutes to with us. I think a registration step is under 20 to 30 seconds. Takes time, a lot of math. But then improving the proof, the disclosure step is like 1 second. So slow the first time, and then every time after that is quick. The reason we think that makes sense is we want to make sure that you're anonymized enough so people can't tell who you are in that tree. And then from that point on, since it's hard to tell, the disclosures are very quick so that it can be like, I'm signing in, is it me? Yes. And that speed, I think, is super important for consumers, but also for the technology.
I see. This question is open to all, but do we think that blockchain infrastructure can be as quick as how verifiability could be using the internet instead, if that makes sense? The speed at which the internet runs is very different from the speed at which, ZK proofs run. How long do you think it's going to take till we, reach parity with the speed of the internet, if at all?
By internet, do you mean like a centralized party on the internet, or just kind of decentralized peer-to-peer over the internet?
Centralized.
Cool. I mean, if the benchmark is like a SQL database with everyone's ID in it, which is owned by the government, and you're just calling like an API endpoint, that's a pretty tough bar, I think. If you add in verification, I think the benefit would be at very true scale. You get like a natural load balancing effect with these decentralized strategies, which obviously use a decentralized trust system like a blockchain. What's nicer though is I think if you're purely looking at it on the axis of performance, then maybe there's a question, could it be faster? But if you're looking at it on the kind of joint axes of performance and sort of human flourishing, I think on the human flourishing axis the crypto angle is much better, because obviously you have more control and more kind of, I guess, you can permission your identity more, as opposed to sort of sitting on Fido or sitting in kind of like a government database.
Interesting. Yovela, Eric, any thoughts?
So for now, we know that Bitcoin is very slow, right? So, but it's like having the largest decentralized security per se. So how we approach this is that we're building like a verification network on top of Bitcoin. So it's like we can do very high performing verification in seconds. But what we can have the underlying the security level is the same as Bitcoin, just because if something's going wrong with the validator, if they're trying to act maliciously, they could also be slashed directly on Bitcoin. So that's how we're able to leverage Bitcoin security, but also ensure that the verification process is super high performant.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I think the question is when the speed will catch up, and I think the answer is in 2 years it'll have, in 4 years it'll have again, and then every 2 years it's going to speed up. So I think we're living right now, if you're actually trying to do these things on the cloud in a trusted execution environment, which allows for many more people to access ZK proofs and things like that, it's still extremely slow and actually very limited. You're actually limited and bound by not only processor now, you're bound by memory. So I think it just requires Moore's law to continue functioning. And then in 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, sounds like very far away. It happens very quickly. I also think breakthroughs in additional research, focused research in our space will matter a lot. And I think that will help with, I don't know about the generation steps, but on the proving steps, it's already very fast. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to get faster compute, and then people are just going to increase the size of the circuits and things like that. So we may never reach the point where it's very, very fast, but some stuff will continue to get faster. And then the really cool stuff, I think, will always take time. And I think that's okay.
That is okay. I agree. It's a marathon, not a race with the internet. Since we're here to talk about fighting deepfakes, I would love if you guys could tell us about an incident or a case study with your protocols of when you actually had to fight with a deepfake and how you went about doing it and how the show went down behind the scenes.
So currently for our protocol, it's basically utilizing Bitcoin in the most secure way to earn yield or do different activities. So far we're only recognizing the asset, the wallet. So even if you're AI and then you're managing the wallet, then I think it's fine for us, because we only care about if you're signing those transactions, if you're holding or burning particular asset. So for us, we haven't like need to directly fight against deep fake yet. And yeah, maybe I think that you guys will have a better approaches.
I actually, on a more like general point, I actually think that deep fakes are probably a bit better for society and don't need to be sort of fought in a, you know, I don't think it's as adversarial as people make it out to be. The core reason for that is, I think when the internet kind of became a mainstay, which I would kind of put that cut point of when like my parents were like properly online, like using social media, things like that. There was just a transference of how people used to look at newspapers to how they then looked at kind of social media and online content. And online content, you know, at least up until like approximately like 36 months ago, if you wanted to run very kind of sophisticated, I guess like psychological operations on people and like, you know, pretend that certain things had happened, it would cost a lot of money to do that. And typically it was only the kind of remit of very coordinated political or state actors. Now anyone can do it. And as a consequence, you get less trust in media you see online. But I actually think that, you know, that's a consequence, but it's also a benefit that people trust media that they see less online, in the sense that it makes them, you know, more critical as a thinker. So I think like some level of deep fakery is actually net very healthy for society. Of course, if you can verify the inputs and the outputs, you can, you know, attest to the authenticity of something, but I don't think it's as bad as people think.
How do we retain critical thinking is also a question that I would ask. Like, you know, if we see a decline in it, how do we educate our users?
Could you say that again? Sorry.
How do we ensure that we retain the critical thinking that you mentioned is on a decline amongst users?
Like, how do we make sure that they think that? How do we make sure we think critically? You mean?
Okay.
Yeah, I think just it requires people to have painful events. I think the more people are kind of exposed to like the perils of deepfakes, you know, there's a short-term negative cost in like an anti-fragile way, like, you know, you get your fingers burned, but, you know, prevents you from burning the house down eventually. Like, it's sort of, it's a good thing for people to be exposed to them, and then, you know, then, you know, prospectively change the way that they think about online content and view it with a much less kind of trusting eye. And then that prevents, you know, a much, like, it lowers the probability of like a societal collapse where, you know, people can be completely controlled by what they see online because people are more kind of resilient and skeptical towards it. You could think of it like your kind of online immune system, right? You know, just not being ever exposed to germs is like not good, right? So
an online immune system.
Yeah,
That's cool. Coin it. Eric, any
Yes.
instances of deepfakes? I imagine that you see this quite a bit with self.
Well, I think so. It's a good question. I think deepfakes or impersonations, I think, is really what we're trying to get at, or people faking or acting like they're someone else. With self, when you register, we actually help you generate a key that you can record offline. You know, some people want to write it down; they can write it down. The reason we create this key at registration is in the event that someone uses self for an airdrop, and, you know, a country that won't be named creates 1 million wallets so they can do an airdrop claim. That's one part. And by having this secret phrase, it now allows the user to protect their password being used. The second part is, in a passport, actually stored inside of that, you may not know this, is your photo. So part of what we're doing is helping to verify that that information matches the person that's trying to use it. And so that in traditional kind of identity verification, it's called like a liveness check. And so that's one way you can prevent these deep fakes, is if you can prove that the person who says they are this person, if their face matches a particular image stored in there, you're pretty sure. Now, is it 100%? Nothing ever is, but it's going to be like 99.99% true. And then if the other part too is not only do you want to verify that information, but you want to verify that information over time. So if you do it once, it's you kind of either get it or you don't. But if you do it on like 5 times, like once every month for 5 months, you get data each time. And if that remains true each time, then it's more likely to be true over longer term, if that makes sense. So it's a mixture of the tech, the data that's available, and recording that over time and making sense of that.
That's very interesting. All three of you said things that are making me think a lot. There's so many ways in which people are, starting to trick protocols and services into believing something that they're not and hiding as impersonators. How does this get flagged behind the scenes?
I can go quick since I went long the last time. So with proof generation, if you are trying to request information that a user does not want or is categorically, for example, you try to trick them into approving a thing, if it fails, the whole proof doesn't get generated. So it's very black or white. And I think that's very helpful.
Instant.
It's instant. Yeah, everything is instant. Proof that your passport's real, instant. Verification of a proof disclosing your age or that you're over the age of 18, instant. And I think that's just such a bizarre thing in a world where verifying someone is real takes minutes, hours, days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. If you're trying to send money to someone, you don't want to send it to a place that's going to get you in trouble.
So in our verification strategies, we move the Nash equilibrium to where nobody would ever be financially incentivized to cheat. And consequentially, the verifier and the trainer, if they're training a model, behave in accordance with what the user using the protocol to do that training runs requested. In this scenario, though, where, say, the trainer cheats, the likelihood of them being kind of captured is directly proportional to the amount that they've staked. So, for example, if there's a 1 in 100 chance of them being caught, the kind of cost to them, I guess being found out needs to be over 100 times the amount that they're going to receive endogenously inside the system. And then depending on how much the kind of, I guess, user of the system wants to ensure that there's no kind of additional exogenous payments being sent to them, they can, increase that staking multiple even higher. So there's going to become quite like a large opportunity cost of capital for someone who wants to participate in the system. But in doing that, it makes it secure. And then in terms of how they're actually caught out during the training run or during an inference or generation run, the trainer and the verifier both commit to the symbolic representation of a neural network's training loop. So if you just imagine every single kind of operation that's going through all the kernels, every single one of them is committed to. And then that kind of symbolic structure, they agree on it on chain. When they go through the real training process, if at certain checkpoints, any of the checkpoints disagree with what the, what's been, I guess, ordained in the symbolic structure, then they enter a second game based on that structure, where we then compare the real values they got until they whittle it down to one that they disagree on, and then the chain arbitrates on that value. And then whoever is found out to be lying, the trainer or the verifier, the liar gets punished, with, in this case, a 100x penalty, which comes from the amount that they've staked to be part of the network.
Yovela?
Yeah, so I think that for us, then definitely when we are trying to streamline user experience, right? So traditionally we have the seed phrase, this sort of thing, so that if users are using those to access their wallet, then I don't think there's like a lot of things that we need to concerned about deepfake, right? But what if we are trying to simplify user experience and then like using biometrics, like verification or other like more Web 2 way, then in this sense, then we do need to, work with like this like leading company to find a ways to how to make sure that this is not like really like a AI pretending, someone and then to steal the assets from our user.
What would you say, what are you guys doing to sort of retain authenticity in the age of AI?
You mean the user authenticity?
Yeah, users' authenticity.
Yeah. I think that's, so for us, so essentially what we're doing is that on top of the trust minimized bridge, we're building applications that allow people to directly use native BTC to engage with different DeFi, like RWA opportunities. And then, so in this sense, then we do. So as long as that there are money in the wallet, right? Then it's like real user. But like what we're like afraid is that there could be potentially someone who take control like some of our users like account. So we also want to ensure security, like it's not easily to be hacked. So in this case, if just like a traditional like seed phrase like private key wallet, I think it's actually easier, but it would just create a lot of barrier for a user to like manage it. But if we want to use like biometric verification or like some Web2 login, in this case, then AI like deepfake, a lot of things would come in and then might scam the users. So I think that for us, it's mainly like trying to protect the asset of our user on this sense, and then also balancing security between user experience.
It doesn't matter to us who the user is. So it's an open system. As long as the users, got a valid public-private key and the funds to do it, then it's on them. The verification system will work out if the inputs and the outputs and the function stuff all match. But like other than that, whether or not it's whoever, whatever, in terms of machine intelligence that system is, we're unopinionated about it.
Very cool. Gensyn is for everyone, regardless of who the user is. Ark?
So, I mean, I think if I understand the question, for us, the way that we ensure authenticity is that we actually have the people scan their face. Not us, our tech, but it's from your phone. Like if you unlock your phone through your Face ID or whatever it's called on Android, your phone, your finger or a passcode, we use those to verify. And that's what we unlock the information that's, we keep information on the phone, we don't take it. And allows us to verify that the user is authentic. And then they're able to actually issue these disclosures. And then there's a history of it too. So if you verify your age for, maybe you want to buy alcohol in America, you need to be 21. Instacart will actually take a picture of your ID card. It's kind of creepy. But if you want to use Self to do that, we would keep a record of that and any of the other disclosures that you've done so that you can go back and review them. But ultimately it comes down to just, we want to make sure the person verifies who they are before we take any action. And I think that's, from our tech, the best way to do it.
How do we make sure that verification tools don't become tools of censorship or control? What standards and safeguards or principles do we need to be focused on in order to ensure that that doesn't happen?
So for us, like for anti-censorship, I think like Bitcoin is actually, in terms of blockchain, it's the most like anti-censor one, right? And then, so for us, for the infrastructure we are building is like fully permissionless, it's trust minimized, so that like and the very important thing is that in the specific implementation, during the challenge process, right, we need to enable Bitcoin to like verify, to process those transactions related to the challenge. And in this case, there's actually something that a lot of people might not be aware of. It's like Bitcoin can only process transaction, like automatically process transactions smaller than 400 kilobytes. So even if like the Bitcoin block size is 4 megabytes, you have like a 3.9 megabytes something, then it's still, you need to work with a miner to process it. So in this case, it's bringing in risk for censorship and also, centralization. So that's why we also further optimize the transaction chunk size so that all the transactions that going through the challenge process will be smaller than 400 kilobytes. So that it's like really automatically processed just as regular transactions on Bitcoin. So this is how we can, achieve like the highest level of anti-censorship.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts from our panelists on fighting deepfakes and authenticity in the age of AI?
Yeah, I have a quick one. So the one thing I like about the tech we're building is making sure that the user has control. And I would actually challenge everybody here to design that into your system. It's great if all the bots are doing all the work, but make sure you have checks in place to re-authenticate or re-verify. Ultimately, these bots should be working for me. I'm not going to be working for a machine. Hopefully I'm dead by then, but just a challenge. Think about the real people.
Harry?
I think I've said my piece. I've said everything.
Okay. Yovela.
Yeah, I think that like Bitcoin plus AI, it seems something that's far away. Yeah, but actually there's many ways that we can, utilize Bitcoin to secure like the AI future and also enable Bitcoin holders to earn yields by, in AI economy. So we're super looking forward to that as well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for all that you guys are doing for the space. It's incredible. And I look forward to catching you guys again. And sorry we had to cut this short, but it is what it is.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.